vision. We are the vision casters for our church. God's called us to cast that vision, to determine that vision for the
or
ministry.
whatever. Any pastor that comes in could use these core values, and it would have.
Hey, that needs to change. We need to embrace the value of grace, grace and things.
And so if they say this is what I'd like to do, and we see automatically that's an affront to who we are as a church based on our core values, then that's an immediate no. Like, no.
Every search team will ask a prospective pastor, what's the first thing you're going to do when you get here? Right?
Yeah,
you know,
right.
You can just start immediately.
Yeah. I'm going to see how many of y'all's crazy. That's what I'm going to see.
You're listening to Designed to Lead, a podcast where you get to hear the experiences, both the successes and the failures, of two pastors who want to continue to grow in church leadership. Through this journey, we want to share what we're learning along the way. So if you're involved or interested in ministry, this podcast is for you. This is Designed to Lead.
Welcome to this episode of the Designed to Lead podcast. I'm Reid Terry, pastor at Lone Oak Baptist Church.
And I'm Casey Johnson, pastor at Bonita Road Baptist Church.
It's good to have you back in Lone Oak.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, we're good.
It's cold here.
It is cold outside. Yes. We've had ice the last few days, so good and chilly.
Yeah.
We're going to actually later tonight have a wild game supper you're going to be speaking at, so you're up here for that, and going to knock out some podcasts while you're here. It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has been. It's been a journey, actually, man. Of course, deer season, messes me up.
Right.
And so, sorry about that, y'all, but I do a deer hunting YouTube channel as well, so deer season kind of keeps me going pretty heavy, and then, of course, we just had all kind of stuff happen, a few COVID outbreaks and all that kind of stuff, and of course just recently, our worship leader at our church passed away and all that, so it's been nuts, been crazy.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, we had just gotten started with a couple of episodes, and so we really didn't have a chance to plan ahead, but I hope this coming year, as we get closer to that time of year, maybe we can record more in advance. And,
that's right.
So people don't miss out on episodes.
Yeah, this is helpful to be able to do two of them at one time.
Yeah, that's our plan today, is to record a couple of different ones. Now, they won't post at the same time. We'll post them at different times.
Yeah, y'all aren't supposed to know that.
Right. That's right.
Oh, goodness. Yep. Fun times.
Well, tell us about today. What are we talking about?
Well, last time we met, we talked about vision, and we kind of made reference to the fact that we were going to talk about core values today. So we're going to talk about core values, and I'm not sure if the listeners will remember or not, but I made an illustration last time we were together about the vision and the mission and the core values and what that looks like. And pretty much the way I talk about that is I'll just draw out like a stairwell. Mm-hmm. And at the top of that stairwell, it is a door at the top. Right. And when you open that door, that's your vision, which is your preferred reality. And at the bottom is the current reality. And, of course, the mission is the steps that get us to the vision. But if you look underneath the steps, you're going to see basically what would be the 2x4s. And that's going to be your core values.
Right.
So the core values are pretty much those things that really hold all of it together. Kind of the rebar to the concrete, if you will.
Sure. Yeah, the stairs aren't just floating in midair.
No.
Something's got to hold up the mission.
That's right.
The steps that we take to get from where we are to where we're going.
Yep.
And that which undergirds all that we do.
All that we do.
Are the core values.
Correct.
So that's what we're talking about. Core values are what we stand for. It's who we are. It's what we're all about.
Yep.
All of those things, I think, help describe what core values are.
Yeah, it's kind of our identity. It's the building blocks of who we are and what we do.
Right.
So
yeah,
very important.
Now, oftentimes we talk about, you hear more, I guess, about vision and mission than you do core values.
Right. They're
kind of overlooked.
Yeah.
They're kind of pushed to the side.
Yeah.
But because they're not discussed doesn't mean they don't exist.
That's right. I think the reason why people focus on those other two is because the vision obviously is where you're trying to get to. And you see these the grandiose idea of what you want to look like, and so everybody thinks about that. And then, of course, the mission is kind of the steps that we take to get to the vision. So those are the things that seem to be very tangible to us. or at least the dream, or at least
Right.
kind of like the dream, the vision is, and then the steps that we take to get there. So everybody focuses on that, but the core values have to be there.
And we're both pastors, and I know we got several pastors that listen and watch. And the vision, we are the vision casters for our church. God's called us to cast that vision, to determine that vision for the ministries that He's called us to. Mission, that's where we start bringing in leaders. We bring in other people in our church, and they can help develop those steps that get us to the vision that we see and that God has given us for our ministries.
Right.
Where does core values come from?
Well, it's really kind of one of those situations to where, whether you really realize this or not, some of them are already there. Let's just say you're a pastor and you come into a church.
Yeah.
When you get there,
Yeah.
they have some.
That's right.
Nobody may know what they are, but they're there.
Right.
And so the more you lead and the more you begin to scratch the surface of how that church functions, what some of those people think, then you're going to start to be able to figure out, wait a minute, this is like a major thing for these people.
Sure.
And you could say at that point, that's probably a core value of theirs. And then, of course, there are core values that we kind of come up with, maybe something that's not there already, but we would like for it to be there. And so then, therefore, we kind of come up with that.
Yeah. Those core values are not necessarily something that you have to invent.
Right.
They're something you uncover.
That's right.
As a pastor, when you go into a church, that's some of the first things you ought to be doing.
Yeah.
In your conversations with people, as you're talking with your congregation, you're listening to your leaders, and you're thinking about history and where they've come, you're going through that process of uncovering. It's almost like an archaeological dig. You're kind of dusting the dirt away
where's
until
that bone at?
Where's the bone at? Right. Where's that important stuff at? And you uncover those core values. But now some of them are good. Some of them you'll want to latch on to.
Right.
But there may be some that need to change.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So you experienced that maybe in a church you've been at before, or?
Well, to be honest with you, before, whenever I was pastoring a church, before I actually got to this one, and this one is the one that I started thinking about these things.
Right.
Last podcast we talked about pastors not necessarily thinking about all of this stuff. They're just preaching the word and they think that's it. Well, that's the way I was the first church I pastored.
Sure.
So wasn't thinking a thing about core values or vision or mission, just preach the word. And even back then I was learning to do that. So I didn't think about it back then. Now, having said that, at the church I'm at now, there are some things that I think that we uncovered, even things that I heard about the church whenever I first got there, that I knew that came from a core value principle in that church. And some of it I didn't want. But most of the DNA of the church and the core values of the church, I was totally fine with. But there were a few that I wasn't fine with.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical.
Yeah,
I mean,
think so.
wouldn't you? I mean, I think any pastor going into a church, he's probably going to find somewhere, if he continues to dig down, there's going to be a base somewhere of a core value or two that he can hold on to and build upon. Yeah. But then there may be things. I know I served at a church one time, and man, they were just kind of known in the community for being this very legalistic, very hard against things that hard on things that really didn't matter.
Right.
Some incidental things that weren't heaven and hell issues.
Right.
And for me, that was something that, hey, that needs to change. We need to embrace a value of grace. Yeah. Grace in things that aren't essential.
Grace, not law.
That's exactly right. And so that was one of those things that had to change, that had to be formed. Yeah. But that's not to say there wasn't good things that we could build upon. There obviously.
Well, and I think just from the very fact that some of those core values are there, and then we bring some of those core values to the table, depending on who the leader is, it can change the core values, basically. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but, we have core values at our church. And one of the things that I wanted to do is to, one, bring out the ones that were already there, but then also implement some that I really felt like no matter who the pastor is, whether I leave and go somewhere else or whatever, any pastor that comes in could use these core values.
Right.
And it would apply. to any pastor that came in. That's not to say that a pastor won't change some of them if they do that, if they come in, but it just depends on who the guy is, the leader is.
Yeah.
He may have some he wants to add and some he wants to do away with.
Hey, that's a good thought. I hadn't really thought about this, but what do you think about, as pastors, should we even maybe every 5 years or so reevaluate our core values, the church's core, where we're serving?
Yeah.
I mean, they might even change during our tenure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As the church grows and matures and
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine to do. I mean, I know that core values, one of the ideas is that they are the unchanging principles of who we are and what we want to become. So, and I get that, and that is true.
Right.
But at the same time, I do think that as time changes, depending on the nature of those core values, as far as whether it's a core value that it has more to do with the way you function, as opposed to just who you are from a spiritual perspective,
right,
that core value may change as time goes on.
Sure.
You may want to get rid of it because it no longer applies.
Right.
So I mean, I definitely think from a leadership perspective, we constantly evaluate, and if there are some that need to drop, then so be it.
Right, right. So when we come into a church, and I know I've experienced this, you have as well, and you know there are some personal values that people hold, and then there are some corporate values that the whole church may hold. How do you navigate that and begin to develop how do you navigate that and begin to develop church core values? So how did y'all do that maybe in your past?
Here's kind of how we did it. And I would say this, from a leadership perspective, when you come into a church, you're not going to figure that out first 2 weeks you get there.
That's right. This takes time.
It's going to take time. I mean, I think it was probably, I've been at Bonita Road for 8 years, and I think it was probably 4 years before I ever really started doing this process of like, okay, let's walk through some core values and let's kind of figure out who we are under the surface and who I want us to be based on what I feel like God is calling us to do as a church. And so you're not going to figure that out right off the bat.
Every search team will ask a prospective pastor, what's the first thing you're going to do when you get here, right?
Right.
You can just start immediately.
Yeah. I'm going to see how many of y'all's crazy. That's what I'm going to see. Right. So you really do have to go through an evaluation process. But whenever I got ready to start that process, I had actually went through a revitalization class, and I was taking this class, and one of the things that they did, it was an exercise to figure out the core values of our church. Well, I was at the point to where I felt like I could do that now.
Right.
And they gave me a list, like it was a paper, and it had 50 core values on that paper. And so what I did is I had developed a team at the church, and I gave these lists of core values to these people, and I said, I want you to circle 10 of those core values that you feel like this is who we are, or this is who you want us to become. And so once I did that, everybody did that, I grabbed all those papers, I pulled them together, and like the top, I think it was the top 6, I just started looking, and like most people had the same ones.
Yeah.
And so I knew at that point that they knew that that's either who we were under the surface, or that's who they wanted us to become. And one of the and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but one of the core values that I implemented from a leadership perspective that they did not, but I put excellence in there, because that's a personal core value of mine, is that I want to be excellent in everything that I do. And so if I'm leading the church, I want to be excellent, and I want the church to be excellent. And so I implemented that one because I just felt like that's who we needed to be. If we're going to do everything as unto the Lord, so I want to be excellent in all of it. So I implemented that one as a leader to go along with some of the ones that they had.
Yeah.
So it was pretty sweet how that came together and how everybody was pretty much thinking about the same things as far as our church is concerned. So I knew right then that was probably pretty accurate.
Yeah. And see, our process here was very similar, but a little different in the sense that as I got to know people and know the history of the church, I began to make those notes. All right, what are some things that they value here? What are some things that they hold dear? What are the things that you can see through the years of ministry that are important to this church? And those things I began to write and begin to ask hey, ask our leaders, hey, what do you think? You see this? How have you seen this in the years prior
Right.
in our church? And they would agree, or they might add something. And those began to take shape. And then in much the same way, there was one that I felt like was very important for us as a church. Let's be passionate about things, not sit back and wait for opportunities to come. Let's go out and find those opportunities and be passionate about them. So that was one that I added to where I didn't feel we were, but we wanted to be.
Yeah.
And then once those things kind of all came together, then you begin to try to put them in a form that can be easily disseminated and people can begin to grasp.
Right. Yeah. You see, and that's where you influenced me a lot in that area, because we were talking about this before the show, that you came down, me and another friend, and we had a meeting down at my church, and you were talking about your core values, and you actually showed us what you had come up with and what the church had come up with, and then you had some really cool slogans that went along with your core values. And I just remember whenever you were sharing that with us, the core values were good, don't get me wrong, but the slogans, I was like, man, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that really encouraged me to come up with slogans to go along with our core values so that people could try to remember them pretty easy.
Right.
And so I was impressed by that. So you kind of, I guess that's just iron sharpening iron,
that's
and us learning from each other, because that was a big deal to me whenever you showed us that. So I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to do that."
Right. So we've developed 5. I'm going to share those with you. And one of the things that I believe every core value has to be, it has to be based in Scripture.
Yeah.
There needs to be a scriptural basis for that. And so we try to communicate that as well. And this is where, like you said, iron sharpening iron. We'll talk about in a few minutes how you continually keep that in front of the people, because we did some work up front and had these things and rolled them out, I guess you could say, but really haven't visited them a whole lot since, and we need to do a better job of that. But so our 5 are we value being a blessing, not being a burden, and that just comes from Proverbs 11:25. Whoever brings a blessing will be enriched. If we're blessed, God will enrich us. So let's work on blessing others. Be contributors, not consumers. Jesus came to serve and not be served. And I saw that with our church. Such good contributors to so many ministries financially and with their time. It was just a wonderful thing. People, not preferences. We value people, not preferences. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, but with humility, value others above yourself. And then action over apathy. Let's be people of action.
That's right.
Revelations 3 talks about it makes our Lord sick if we're lukewarm. Let's be on fire for Him. And then the one I mentioned earlier, being passionate, not being passive. God's not a passive God. Jesus came to seek and to save that which is lost. And so let's be passionate about doing, not just sitting back and waiting for God to lead.
And to me, those are good in the sense that, well, number one, it's all biblical, but it's all catchy. But in my opinion, when another dude comes in here, he could take that very thing and say, this is the type of church that this is, based on these core values. I know that. But he could also continue to keep them that way, because every bit of that is biblical.
That's it.
And the people know it, and the people want to be that. And that's who they think they are, and they want to be.
And there's room to shape it with his personality and his calling to add to that.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So where do y'all have?
All right, we got 6.
Okay.
6.
It's because you're an overachiever.
I'm an overachiever.
I had 5,
yes.
go ahead.
I'm a Tommy Topper. Love is the first one, and of course our little slogan is, "We want to love people, not label them."
Yeah.
And so that, obviously that's completely biblical. And then the other one is freedom. We want to worship in freedom and not fear. And then the third one is truth. We want to obey the word and not the world.
That's good.
And then the fourth one is leadership. We want to turn learners into leaders. All right, so turn learners into leaders. The next one is the one that I implemented, which was excellence. We want to promote excellence over mediocrity. And then the last one was growth. We want to promote growing through going.
That's good.
So those are the 6 that we live and die by in our church.
Now here's the deal, listeners. Those sounded very familiar. They were catchy. They kind of this over this, this not this.
Yeah.
But that's because you and I, we're friends. We talk.
That's correct.
And you just shared that we had that conversation, and all core values don't have to sound that way.
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
They
Yeah,
can they can be much different in
Yeah.
the way they're stated.
right. Yeah, but I mean, if you want to be cool though, they'll sound like this.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to do it right, you'll do it
that's
like
right.
us.
You'll do it like us. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, come on, man. We're the ones got the podcast.
That's right.
No, it doesn't have to be that way, but it's just it's just a neat way to say it and a neat way to remember it.
Yeah,
At least it is for me.
Yeah, and I like the positive and the negative that both of them say, because not only does it say this is what we're going to be, it also illuminates wrong thinking,
Right.
but it does it in a very non-threatening, non-combative way.
Correct.
You
Yeah.
know, this is what we're going to do as opposed
To this. Yeah, good observation.
And so I like the way they both encapsulate that very,
Yeah.
very much so.
Yeah,
All
that's
right,
cool.
so now talk to me about how y'all use you developed them, you've got them. Now, how do they work? You
Okay.
know, what do you do?
Okay, let me start maybe by saying how we implemented them and how, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, if it's all right for me to go into this, like how I keep it before the people.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for.
And
That's
then I'll show how we use them.
Okay.
Well, the first thing I did is after we developed them, I kind of developed a sermon series.
Right.
Is how I introduced them to the people, and
Yep.
it was like one sermon on each one of the core values.
Yep.
And I basically just went in depth of who we're wanting to be, who we think we are, based on some of the and I told them about the whole team philosophy, and the team come up with this, and this is what we think, and so that just one sermon per thing, and then I had like banners and signs made up that are hanging around our church. So that's before them in that particular way. And then also we had like brochures made up of the church and, times for our, classes and all this kind of stuff. And it has our core values on there. Obviously, it went on the internet as well. So once or twice a year, I always go back and revisit this. So I just want to keep it before them at least once, sometimes twice a year.
Now, is that in a sermon
It's
or
in
is
one
that
sermon.
Okay.
After that initial one
Series.
sermon per core value, after the initial series, every year I'll go back and visit it once, possibly twice a year, just to keep it before them, to remind them this is who we are.
Yeah.
And this is how we function, and this is the way we're going to do things, because we have established that that's who we are and that's who we want to become. And so I did that, and then I even had like bracelets made up, that have the logo stuff on there. Love, freedom, has our core values on there. And so just to kind of help them remember. And then every so often in a sermon on a Wednesday night or something like that, I'll say something about it in a message, or why we do this, because this is our core values, such and such, such and such. So I just try to keep it before them. Nothing really, nothing really fancy, but just always keeping it in their ear and always keeping it in their mind. And then the way we implement it is we actually try to do it. Like one of the big things when I first got to Bonita Road, one of the things was almost like a fear of worship.
Yeah.
Like you didn't hear much amening. You didn't hear much. You didn't see much hand lifting. You just didn't see a lot of movement at all. It was almost like it was fearful for them to do that. So as time has gone on, and particularly as we begin to point out we worship in freedom and not fear, you see a whole lot more of that now. Obviously, it's still a Baptist church, but and so it's not like it's wild and crazy, but you see a whole lot more of that. And then one of the things I like to do is I like to say from the pulpit, because I know that we'll have visitors out there, hey, we're going to enter into a time of worship, and we want you to know that one of our core values is to worship in freedom and not fear. So if it's biblical and you desire to worship that way, then you worship that way. So we implement it by sharing it with even our visitors and people like that, but we also gauge everything we do by it. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want to do this, well, we look at our core values, and it's not that we're laying it alongside them like on a piece of paper, but
Right.
we know what they are.
Yeah.
And so if they say, this is what I'd like to do, and we see automatically that's an affront to who we are as a church based on our core values, then that's an immediate no.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're not doing that because that's not who we are.
Right.
That's not who we say we're going to be, you know?
Yeah.
And so then that means it's scrapped.
Yeah.
You
Now,
know?
you covered a lot right there.
Yes.
Let's break it down just a second
Yes,
because the initial work.
That was a preacher in me, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's right. You were rolling. The initial work, once you've developed these core values and you began to embrace them as a church, is that communication.
Yes.
And there's so many different ways you can do that. Y'all did it through sermon series. You did it through pamphlets. You did it through stuff you put on the walls, the bracelets, those kind of things. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. We did some of the same things. There was sermons. There was things put on the wall about those. So those things always communicate and are good.
Yeah.
Where I failed, as a leader, is that continually bringing that up. The pandemic really just killed us in that sense as you began to focus on other things. Everything changed. But that is a wonderful idea. Hey, let's every 6 months at least, every quarter, whatever it is, let's talk about these things. Let's reintroduce them again. Right. We may know them, we deal with them, read them, think about them all the time, but our congregations don't always do those. So I think one of the professors I had in seminary used to say, when you get tired of saying something, they're just starting to get it. Right. Yeah. Because we deal with it more, so it's obviously internalized in us quicker.
Yeah. And I think also we have to remember, we have to be mindful that from the leadership perspective, this is some things that really we focus on and we're passionate about. Not everybody is.
Right.
I mean, you could say this 100 times to some people, and they're still going to go, I'm just coming to church, man, to listen to preaching and ask Jesus to speak to me. I don't care about all that.
Right, exactly.
Even though it's important to you and maybe a lot of people in the church, some people just aren't going to be concerned about it. And you have to be all right with that, but you still have to not let that deter you from talking about it and sharing it and keep going, Yeah,
because if you remove that, what happens to everything else? Just in your illustration, it's going to collapse. So it's got to be there, which is where you transition to, and we'll talk about that for just a minute, is how that works in that it undergirds. So that is a framework that ministries, it is a framework that programs, it's a framework that your Sunday school classes, your Bible study classes, they should all embrace those same things as well.
Yes.
And it should be, those things should be laid up against that framework and said, okay, is this going to be done with excellence?
Right.
Is this going to help us be leaders?
Right.
Disciple us from being just a learner about who Christ is to leading us to be like Christ? Those kind of things, right?
I agree, 100%. Like my son just came on as the full-time youth pastor at our church, which you know that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've talked with him about is to make sure that he knows the core values and remembers them, because that'll shape the way he does things, and that'll give him a guide to be able to, say yes and to say no to some things, to be able to blame it, so to speak, on the core values and the mission and the vision. And that's one of the things we talk about with mission, vision, and core values. It helps keep direction, and it helps keep you from going the wrong direction. And so I've just tried to help him understand, and I believe if it's going to be the DNA of who we are, then our whole staff needs to be aware of it, and they need to understand it and know it. And for example, they're doing a disciple now this weekend, and a big disciple now that they've got planned, and he was just super excited about it. And he told me, he said, "Hey, Dad," I said, "I want to tell you kind of what we got planned." And I'm like, "Well, all right, tell me about it." He said, "Well, we got this huge game planned. It's life-size, human-size Pac-Man." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah." He said, "We're going to build like a Pac-Man like course inside the gym. Like the whole gym is a Pac-Man maze." I was like, "Man, that sounds cool." I was like, "How you going to do that?" And he said, "Well, we're going to buy some 2x4s and some 1x4s and stuff and some Visqueen, and we're going to make the thing." And I was like, "Do what?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "You know how much that's going to cost?" And he's like, "Hey, excellence, Dad. Excellence. We're going to go all out. We're going to go all out and make it great." And so I was like, "Well, I guess you got a point there." And so they built it, and he took me through it. And I was like, "Dude, this thing is amazing, awesome, man." Yeah. It was so sweet. But it did cost some money to do that. But the great thing about it is that he was also smart enough to know that we're fixing to add on to our fellowship hall. at our church. And so he goes to our building grounds director and he says, hey, I'm going to have all these boards left over after we tear this down. Can you use them to help? And he was like, oh, yeah, we'll buy the boards because we'll use them to do that. Oh, yeah. So it ended up basically costing not very much for him to do it. But his whole concept was excellence.
Yeah.
If we're going to do it, let's be excellent at it. So I think all your staff and your teachers and everybody needs to be aware of it, and they need to live it.
Yeah.
Learn it.
And let's circle back around as we're about to wrap this up.
Okay.
In that this is so important for pastors to understand and to implement in their churches, because without it, everybody has values.
Right.
Stated or unstated.
That's right.
Everybody has values. Your church is made up of 20 people, 200 people, 2,000 people. Yeah. Everybody in there has values. Yeah. If we don't come together as the leader and give those values, corporate values, and give those a name so that everybody's pulling in the same direction, right, then you're fighting each other.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because everybody's going to want to be doing what is most essential to them. Yeah, and the thing about that is if we have those core values from a corporate perspective, everybody knows where we're going corporately. Yeah. Now you may have some that don't match that are personal, and then I guess that's where if you try to exercise a personal core value that goes against the corporate core values, and that's whenever the leader says, "No, we're not doing that because that's not our corporate core values."
Right.
That may be your personal one, but that's not our corporate one. Right. So it'll cause us to be something we're not. So, it just helps guide. It gives an expectation, and it helps you go to where you want to be. It helps you be on purpose about everything.
On purpose, that's right. It gives you focus.
Yeah. Holds it all up, man.
That's it. That's right. Anything you want to share, anything practically, anybody that wants to get on this course and start going this direction and thinking, what do they need to read? What do they need to look up? Where would they start?
Listen, man, there is a book, and this is the book that really kind of introduced me to all of this whenever I was in that revitalization class. It was Advanced Strategic Planning by Aubrey Malphurs. And that's a great book for you to look at, and it can be applied from a ministry perspective or from a business perspective, because we've talked about this before. A lot of time ministry and business principles overlap as far as leadership is concerned. But this book was so helpful in helping you understand vision, mission, core values, and how to put all of that stuff together. That's actually where I got all of those papers that give me the 50 core values that I had my team kind of circle the top 10 or whatever. So very, very helpful. I would recommend that book for sure.
Well, good deal. Yep. Hopefully that's been helpful to those who are listening, and they'll be on that path of discovering the core values and setting those up for their churches and their ministries, and it'll help them all pull in the same direction.
It'll definitely help get you going in the right spot, right place. Yep.
All right, Casey, good discussion, man. Good to be back doing this.
I know. I'm ready.
Glad you're here.
Ready for round number 2.
That's right. All right. Well, thank y'all for joining us on Design to Lead, and we'll see you next time.
There you go.